Oh man, it's time for round number 11 at Seattle. And if there's one thing we know about Seattle, it's that it likes to rain there. Thankfully, it does look like during the race time, it should be relatively clear, and we know that Dirtworks can be absolute magicians when it comes to having the track ready, especially if it's not raining during the night show. Right now, it kind of looks to me like we might see something very similar to what we saw last year, and last year's race brought us some pretty good highlights.
Yeah, man, arm's about as hard as morning wood right now.
So this is going to be our race day updates show. If you guys have been here before, you already know what we're going to do. We're going to go through everything you guys need to know before we get into the night show. The first thing we're going to jump into is our injury updates, and thankfully we do have a few guys returning this week in the 250 class. Starting off with Jordan Smith, it was kind of up in the air whether or not he would be returning this week, but thankfully he will be returning. Does seem a little bit fast as he is returning from 4 broken ribs, as well as a punctured lung, and he did even lacerate his spleen. But either way, it's great to see him back. The other guy who is injured and not necessarily returning, but still riding, is going to be Julien Beaumer. He's still very much in the title fight, so glad to see that he's pushing through it. He did dislocate his shoulder and have some injuries from that. But anyways, he'll be racing tonight. Then we have quite the laundry list of riders that are out, some for the remainder of the season, and some are still hoping to return at some point. The first guys we're going to talk about is going to be the Pro Circuit riders of Drew Adams and Ty Masterpool. They're both out with their respective injuries. Drew Adams broke his collarbone, and Ty Masterpool is still dealing with that hand issue. The next guy is going to be Billy Laninovich. He was hoping to return for this round, but unfortunately he's not quite feeling better enough from that wrist injury. And Robbie Wageman is also dealing with a wrist injury, and he's hoping to return for Denver. Then I just want to go through the list of everyone who's out for the remainder of the Supercross season, just so we don't forget about them. We got Anthony Bourdon, who absolutely annihilated himself in that practice crash. Really hated to see that. He was riding really well. Ryder DeFrancisco is also out. Derek Drake, he's hoping to return for motocross. Evan Ferry with that Achilles injury. Talon Hawkins, Jet Reynolds, and Styles Robertson. Moving on to the 450 class, we do have some more new injuries to update on as far as guys that are not necessarily returning but pushing through some injuries. So obviously we have Ken Roczen, who is going to be riding with that separated shoulder or torn AC joint. Definitely going to be painful, but he was able to manage through the Triple Crown last weekend. I don't expect him to feel much better. It's only been about 2 weeks since he injured himself. Sure, it will be a little bit better, but mainly just try not to re-aggravate that injury. And then, of course, we have Malcolm Stewart, who still has that hip injury. We did see him get on the podium last week with that hip injury, so hopefully he was able to get that loosened up during the week and come out feeling pretty good this weekend, but definitely expect him to at least be feeling that a little bit. And then, of course, the other rider involved in that incident was Justin Hill, and he did come away with a sprained ankle. However, he was still able to salvage, I believe, an 11th place finish, so definitely still in it. And he's still well inside the top 10 in the points, so it's great to see that he's able to continue. And then in other encouraging news, we did see Cade Clason return to Supercross this week for the first time after breaking his arm. He will not be competing this week. Look for him to return sometime around Philadelphia. Then, of course, Joey Savatgy, he's going to be out with his punctured lung and broken ribs. Really hated to see that as he was kind of becoming a consistent top 10 guy. And then we all know Eli Tomac, Jorge Prado, and the Lawrence brothers are all out. Moving on to our 250 top contenders. At the top this week, we still have Haiden Deegan, and he's coming off of a solid 3rd place finish at the East-West Showdown. He did look to have the speed to move forward a little bit, but he also seemed to push it just over the edge, and that caused him to go over the berm. Either way, he now has a 6-point lead over Julien Beaumer, who did have a bit of a rough go at the Showdown. He did salvage an 8th place finish with that banged up shoulder. It's going to be interesting to see if he's feeling any better this weekend or if the weather does play a factor in the results. If the track is a bit muddy, it'll be really interesting to see if he can use that to his advantage, as he did compete in the West region last year and he did race this particular race, as well as the whole beginning of the series was pretty muddy. But if you listen to him talking about that last season, it was something that he really struggled with. He felt like it almost derailed his season. Remember, he did come out swinging at Anaheim 1 and had a really good result there, and then his season kind of fell off a cliff for a bit, and that was mainly due to the fact that they were all mud races. I'm not convinced that either Haiden Deegan or Julien Beaumer are exceptional mud riders, so if the track is pretty muddy, which I'm not convinced that it will be, it'll be fun to see how those guys can manage that. The next closest rider in the championship right now is going to be Cole Davies, and he is 22 points back, but he's coming off of a solid top 5 finish at the showdown. Then behind him we have Joe Shimoda, who's only 1 point behind Davies, and he is also coming off of a 6th place finish, so only 1 place behind Davies at the showdown as well. Definitely two guys who could kind of be interchangeable right now. I feel like Davies has a little bit of a higher ceiling, but Shimoda definitely has that veteran-like experience. And I would have to imagine that by now his hand is starting to feel quite a bit better. And I feel like either one of those two guys could definitely come out and win tonight. Then only 1 point behind Joe Shimoda, we have Coty Schock. And he's coming off of a solid 14th place finish in Daytona when he raced his 250 in the 450 class. But then he did struggle a bit at the East-West Showdown. Then not too far behind any of those guys, we have Jordan Smith, who is 29 total points down, only 5 back from Coty Schock. And he's somebody who could definitely play spoiler in this title fight. And I would not be surprised to see him finish 3rd overall in the title come the end of the season. Well, let's not forget that he is a race winner earlier on this year. But let's not forget that this particular round is kind of where his season came off the rails last year. He was doing his best to give Levi Kitchen a hard time at this particular round last year when he did have that unfortunate incident where it looked like he probably got cross-rutted and then either knocked the wind out of himself or got concussed, and either way kind of got back onto the track and then almost got hit. And it was this whole controversy, and anyways, he was relatively in the title fight up until that result. So I'd have to imagine there's some mixed feelings returning to the series at this race, especially with similar conditions to the ones that caused him to have the result that he got last year. Then the next closest guy behind him is going to be Michael Mosiman, and he is 35 points down in the championship fight right now, and he's coming off of a 15th place finish at the East-West Showdown. But let's not forget that he did recently also finish on the podium. So the sky's the limit, and who knows where the floor is with him. I believe he ended up getting injured at this race last year. I'm not 100% sure on that. Either way, if I'm Michael Mosiman, I'm just looking to build right now, give my best effort, and see where it gets me. And then behind him, we have Garrett Marchbanks, who is 41 points down in the championship fight right now. And don't forget that he did have to miss a round earlier in the season. So while he hasn't had any exceptional results, he has been rock solid at the races that he's been able to attend. He did manage a solid top 10 at the East-West Showdown as well. It would be great to see some flashes of greatness out of him sometime this season. I'm not sure that we're going to get that, but either way, hopefully he can stay healthy. That does seem to be a challenge with this team right now. Looking at his two teammates on this coast, they're both out with injuries, and like I said, he did also miss one race with an injury as well. Anyways, moving on to the 450 class, at the top we have Cooper Webb, and I'm really excited for this Cooper Webb-Chase Sexton battle that we will likely see this weekend. We had an epic Chase Sexton versus Cooper Webb battle here last year. I'm wondering if we can see something similar again this year. But either way, right now Cooper Webb is in an interesting spot. He seemed to have a lot of momentum going his way, and then that all kind of shifted last weekend at the Triple Crown. To me, it's really hard to say who is the favorite in the championship right now, but I would say it would seem to me that the next rider that can get an upper hand on the other will probably start to take control of this championship for good. As of right now, Cooper Webb does have slightly more control with his 8-point lead over Chase Sexton, but with that being said, Chase is now only 8 points down, and that feels much more manageable than the gap going into the Triple Crown last weekend. That being said, similar to what we said earlier about the 250 class, if the track does have some moisture issues, definitely don't want to give away chunks of points this weekend. And it feels like if somebody was going to do that, it would probably be Chase Sexton. You don't want to make a big mistake and go down or have a bike malfunction or something like that. However, we did see Chase Sexton absolutely dominate in one of the biggest mutters that we've had in recent history last year at San Francisco. And in an interesting contrast, Cooper Webb definitely struggled that race where he even went a lap down to Chase. Anyways, moving on to Ken Roczen in 3rd place. He is 27 points back, so not entirely out of this title fight, but with the fact that he's nursing that shoulder injury, it definitely feels like he's starting to settle into his 3rd place role. I definitely would like to see him be a little bit closer and make things a little bit more interesting, and it feels like he deserves to fight for this title, but at this point it is getting a little bit out of reach. Either way, it's great to see that he's still able to go out there. I can't imagine that it's much fun right now with that separated shoulder, but if you compare where Ken Roczen is at right now to Chase Sexton's championship winning season a couple of years back, he's in a really similar spot, so definitely worth staying in the fight and maybe seeing what could happen. Then in 4th in the championship, we now have Malcolm Stewart, who did leapfrog Justin Cooper with that good finish that he had last weekend. Absolutely heroic ride for the entire Austrian group, but especially Malcolm Stewart with that banged up hip. Definitely love seeing him back on the podium. As much as he's been up there in the points all season and generally had a great season, that was only his 2nd podium of the season. If he can continue to ride like this, it feels like he's probably going to have a guaranteed ride somewhere next year. I don't know that Husqvarna is going to be around for anybody next year, but I'm sure Malcolm would love to return next season. So it's great to see that he's able to put in some more solid results. Then right behind him, we have Justin Cooper, who's only 2 points behind Malcolm, 51 points back in the championship fight right now. And while he did struggle a little bit, he was just outside of the top 5. Really what it comes down to is if the whoop section ever breaks down enough that it's not a major factor, you're probably going to see Justin Cooper in the podium or near the top of the podium. If he can pair a good start with an easy whoop section, I think he's probably going to win. And then of course in 6th in the championship, even with the rough weekend that he had last weekend, we have Jason Anderson. He is now 60 points back in the title fight. And man, you guys might want to keep your eye on this man. I feel like he has a lot of pent-up anger and aggression. And while he is on probation, I don't expect him to really hold back too much if he can get somebody lined up, like say the number 4 or maybe even the number 2. And man, that might not fare well for his probation period, but the fans would be really interested to see how that would play out. I'm not sure that he really owes either one of those guys something, but I'm not sure that he really cares about that. He got in touch with them and he ended up on the ground, and I feel like that's the majority of what he's going to remember. I feel like he might let Cooper Webb slide a little bit more, as Cooper never really touched him, but Chase definitely touched him. Whether he cut down into Chase or not is something that you could debate. And like I said, I don't know that Chase did anything wrong, but I don't know that it's going to matter. So if I was Chase Sexton, I would definitely be on my guard. And if I was a fan watching and I see Jason Anderson going anywhere near any of those 2 guys, I would be locked in for sure. Then only 9 points behind Anderson, we have Justin Barcia. So it's been nice to see Barcia starting to get some better results. Hopefully he can keep that going. It's hard to say exactly what to expect out of him, but I'm pretty sure that he does want a mud race. And then next up, we have a guy that I am 100% sure would enjoy a mud race, and that's Aaron Plessinger. So he has been able to finally leapfrog his way ahead of Justin Hill. He is 86 points back, so definitely still suffering from those 2 low scores at the beginning of the season. But it's awesome to see that he's been able to turn things around with a couple of podiums and really get the ball rolling. At this point, I feel like he has worked his way into a dark horse win contender at this point, especially at a track that might have some weather in play. But I really don't think he needs a mud race to be able to win. I just think he needs things to go right, kind of like what we saw in Detroit or San Diego, which, remember, San Diego, when he did get his win, was not a true mud race, but it was a wet race. And that might be some similar conditions to what we have tonight. Then in 9th in the championship fight, actually tied with Aaron Plessinger, is going to be Justin Hill. And unfortunately, like we saw, he did go down pretty hard in qualifying last weekend. Thankfully, he is going to be lining up, like I said, in the injury updates. Hopefully that sprained ankle doesn't hold him back too much. I don't expect him to do much better than a top 10, but at least if he can just continue to stack points, hopefully he won't need to attend too many pro motocross races to be able to qualify directly into the super motocross rounds, as I know that was a bit of an issue for him last year. Seems like it's kind of hard for Team Tedder to make it to the motocross rounds, but he's definitely somebody who deserves to qualify directly into the playoff rounds, and he's definitely doing himself some favors by stacking all of these points now. Then rounding out the top 10, I feel like you guys are probably going to be a little bit surprised by this. I know I was, and man, shout out to this man, Shane McElrath. He did have a great finish last weekend with an 8th place, and it's awesome to see that he's holding down a 10th place in the championship. It definitely doesn't feel like he's a 10th place guy. And obviously we do have some injuries that are probably helping him right now, but either way, he's still beating some other really solid riders. I mean, just getting an 8th place alone last weekend is really solid. And you guys have to remember that he originally started out the season with only a 6-round deal with the Quad Lock team. And I'm pretty sure they're stoked to still have him at this point, with Savatgy now being out. And the fact that they're able to hold down a top 10 in the championship in the premier class. And then one more rider I just want to give a quick shout out to is going to be Christian Craig, who did make his Yamaha debut last weekend. He did manage a 12th place finish. Looked like he had some ups and some downs, but he stayed in the show all night, which was great to see. A lot of laps, a lot of racing. Definitely not the easiest race to return from an ACL reconstruction. I do expect him to probably be a little bit closer to the top 10 or in the top 10 tonight, but like I said, the weather could play a factor, so you never know exactly how that'll shake out. All right, so now let's move on to the track, weather, and schedule information, and there's a lot to digest here, so let's just get the schedule out of the way really quick. So remember, Seattle is all the way on the west coast. They're going to be kicking off race day live at 2:30 Eastern. Opening ceremonies will be at 7:30 Eastern, and then the actual night show itself will start at 8 o'clock Eastern, but that's only 5 o'clock local time. Now this plays a pretty big factor for two reasons. Number one being that there's a chance of rain up until about 2 o'clock, so not a big gap of time in between when the rain should stop and when the racing is going to start. And additionally, the sun doesn't even set until after 7:30. So there's probably going to be some shadows and definitely some daylight up until about the 450 main event. Now we've seen daytime supercross before. It's always a little bit of a weird vibe, especially with opening ceremonies and all the lasers and you can't even hardly see them. But if the track is already technical and probably a little bit sloppy, and then you add in shadows and deep ruts and things, definitely going to be a challenging track. So keep that in mind. These guys are probably going to have a tough time out there. I understand what Feld and NBC is trying to do by having the races generally start around the same time for everybody every night. It seems like they're kind of fluctuating within an hour and a half window. And I know this definitely helps out you guys on the East Coast, so I'm not against it. But there's also definitely some downfalls like we're seeing here. These guys definitely could benefit from having an extra couple hours to move the program back, not only for the shadows, but also to just have some more time away from the moisture. So we did see that press day was canceled entirely. There was no riding. I do also expect them to probably limit the qualifying, maybe get rid of a session or something like that, or probably get rid of free practice. I would imagine they're going to want to leave the track covered as long as possible. But looking at what we've seen of the track so far, it looks like they were able to build it without having too much moisture mixed in, and they obviously did get it covered. So while it has been raining throughout the week, it was supposed to be this insane storm, and so far from what I've heard, it really wasn't that bad. So I really do have relatively high hopes for a pretty raceable track. I do expect to see the guys jumping the jumps for the most part. I'm sure it's going to have some wet spots and probably some spots where it really breaks down where the water did puddle. But overall, I'm going to have to predict, like I said, a pretty raceable track. We're about to get into our fantasy statistics and things like that, but if you guys are playing fantasy, I wouldn't get too crazy with your picks. I do expect the track to be relatively normal. And now let's jump into our rider statistics. If you guys are playing fantasy or making any bets, this segment is for you. So starting off looking at our points leader, Cooper Webb. Last year he did win this race, but generally he did seem to be a bit slower than Chase, and he also did have Jet Lawrence catching him at one point, but we did see Jet make a mistake. Anyways, Cooper Webb did ride pretty well. He definitely got some pretty bad arm pump, as we saw on his podium comments. So we did see Chase Sexton continuously closing in on him. After he did stall a couple of times, he hit a couple of tough blocks. And even though Cooper Webb did have a sizable lead on the last lap, it ended up being a tight battle all the way to the line. Hard to say how much of that was arm pump and how much of that was Chase Sexton riding really well. But at the end of the day, none of that really matters because he did end up winning the race. The reason I'm mentioning all this is because I do expect the track conditions to be relatively similar this time around, and I do expect his main competition to be Chase Sexton. Now looking at his season statistics, last weekend at the Triple Crown was the first time that he's been off the podium in the last 7 rounds, and it was only the second time this year that he's crashed during a race. And it was the first time he crashed in a main event. So generally, he's been very consistent, and when he's off the ground, he's on the podium. Looking at his main competitor, Chase Sexton, this is the first time he's been on top of the podium in the last 6 rounds. But generally speaking, looking at his last couple of years, he tends to close off the season a lot stronger than he starts it. And listening to his recent interviews, he's starting to take accountability for making up where his bike is lacking a little bit. He is claiming that now he understands that he can't always expect the bike to be 100% perfect, and he just needs to make up for where the bike is not working. And it was interesting to see him not repeat his mistake that he made at the last Triple Crown this time around when Cooper Webb once again got in front of him in the final main event. He really didn't push the issue when he didn't need to. Now, I don't know that that's going to apply to the race this weekend, but it does indicate that he is learning from his mistakes. Now, as far as Ken Roczen, he's been way better on the West Coast so far this season with an average finish of 3, and he has struggled a little bit on the East Coast, but some of that is due to crashes and DNFs. Looking at his shoulder injury, if it's just a grade 1 AC joint separation, then he's probably starting to feel pretty good. But if it's anything more than that, I'm sure he's still going to be sore this weekend. And while he did do quite a bit of racing, he didn't have to sustain that pace for more than 15 minutes or so. So keep in mind, with a rough track, having to go over 20 minutes could play a factor for him this weekend. I definitely think he's a podium guy and a win contender, but I would just be careful, especially with his shoulder injury. Now, as far as Malcolm Stewart, it was absolutely awesome to see him get back on the podium. Last weekend, he looked like the second best rider out there, but I think there is something to be said about the fact that he was pretty banged up. And I think there's a lot going on with him mentally right now. So obviously we did see his full potential when he won the race earlier this year in Tampa, but ever since that race, he has not been able to get back on the podium. So I do think he's feeling some sort of pressure, and I feel like when he came into the race banged up, mentally he had relieved that pressure from himself, knowing that, you know what, I'm banged up. Just the fact that I'm lining up is good enough. And once that pressure was gone, I think maybe he was able to ride a little bit better. So now, having backed up his earlier podium in the season with a second place finish, maybe that pressure comes back this week and maybe he doesn't ride as well. I would be really careful putting him back on your podium this weekend if you're playing fantasy. Now, as far as Justin Cooper, I think the opposite could be said compared to Malcolm Stewart. He's been in the top 5 in the last 4 regular standard rounds, and even with 3 bad starts in the Triple Crown last weekend, he still managed a 6th place, so he was just outside of the top 5. I definitely feel like he's a top 5 guy. He's been very consistent with that as of late. But then one more guy I think is definitely should be considered as a top 5 guy, and I know that this is the 6th person we're talking about, so this makes it kind of tough. Aaron Plessinger has been in the top 5 every single gate drop since Daytona, including all 3 of the Triple Crown main events. So he's definitely starting to seem like a consistent top 5 guy, and he's even been on the podium a couple of times now. Seems like he's definitely got the belief in himself, and if the track conditions work out to be similar to what I think they will, it's not going to be that different than the race that he won in San Diego. Just keep in mind that Aaron Plessinger is probably one of the least upset guys to see rain, and make your decisions accordingly. Now, that is pretty much what I'm going to go over as far as the top 5 statistics, but there are some other guys that you could definitely consider mixing into there. Most likely Jason Anderson or Justin Barcia would enter that conversation. So that would already bring us to a total of 8 riders. Then the next little group of riders I have right below them would be Justin Hill, Dylan Ferrandis, and Christian Craig. So by the time you factor in those guys, we've covered 11 riders, and the reason I mention that is because the wild card for Rocky Mountain this week is 12th place. So if you guys agree with me that that's probably the top 11 riders, then everybody else we're going to talk about would be good wild card picks, or maybe you bump one of those guys down if you think they're going to have a bad race. So the first guy that I would mention is going to be Shane McElrath. Like I said, he is 10th in the points. Dylan Ferrandis is actually 11th in the points behind him, but he did have a couple of rough rounds. So if you flip those 2 guys around, that would be 10th and 11th, putting Shane in 11th. But then we have Christian Craig, so if you bump him up, now Shane McElrath is your 12th place guy. Then the next closest guy who would actually be 12th in points is going to be Mitchell Oldenburg. Then behind him would be Benny Bloss, but we saw Benny Bloss beat Mitchell Oldenburg last weekend, so he's definitely somebody who's trending upwards. And then the next closest guy behind him would be Colt Nichols. So I don't think it's going to be anybody below Colt Nichols that's going to be inside the top 12. I would definitely reach from that pool. Personally, I'm leaning towards either like a Christian Craig or Mitchell Oldenburg. We've seen Shane McElrath have some really good races in wet rounds before, so I'm a little bit hesitant to put him back in 12th, especially with a solid top 10 last week. If you guys have made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you sticking around this far. It really helps my video stick out to the YouTube algorithm, and that really helps me out. I definitely do my best to bring you guys the best content that I can, and I definitely have some big plans for the future. I really appreciate you guys helping me grow this channel. I don't want to just bring you guys race day updates or motocross stories, even though I do enjoy that quite a bit. I definitely want to bring you firsthand media coverage, and I've been able to do that a little bit off and on, but I want to be able to do it more and more. So just know that I'm trying to grow this community to be something much more than just what it is right now.
And I appreciate each and every one of you who's helping me do that. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.